Hello, and welcome to today's event, Migrating to the Cloud, Best Practices for a Successful Strategy. I'm Jeremy Kalin, Senior Fellow for the Governing Institute. I also have the honor of serving as CEO of Eutectics, a mission-driven company that works all over the country mobilizing capital for the public good, with a particular focus on clean energy. More broadly, my work is centered around policy innovations that help states and local governments integrate smart enterprise solutions to save money and improve the delivery of public services. For many reasons, I'm honored to serve as moderator for today's governing event, and just want to say a special thank you to each of you for joining us. I know we're in for an informative session over the next 45 minutes. While my work with Governing Institute and at Eutectics typically focuses on energy and facility operational improvements, this specific topic of enterprise resource planning is near and dear to my heart. During my time as a state legislator in the Minnesota House, especially on the State Government Finance Committee, we worked on addressing many of our own state's legacy enterprise systems through cloud software as service solutions and other methodologies, with applications ranging from internal accounting to externally facing program delivery across multiple state agencies. We are really lucky today to have a great speaker who has deep experience in the topic of migrating to the cloud, and I personally look forward to learning from her alongside you and learning from your questions as well. Before we begin, I want to pass along a couple of brief housekeeping notes. First, a recording of this presentation will be emailed to all registrants within 48 hours. You can use the recording for your reference or feel free to pass along to colleagues. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and you can participate in the Q&A with us by asking questions at any time during the presentation. You should see the Q&A box on the bottom left of the presentation panel. Please send in your questions as they come up throughout the presentation. Our speaker and I will address as many of these questions as we can during the Q&A portion at the close of the webinar today. If you would like to download a PDF of the slides for the presentation, you can do so by clicking the Webinar Resources widget, also at the bottom of the console. And I'll note that the handbook that I will be referencing, published by Governing with the support of Workday, is also available in that Webinar Resources widget. Also, during today's webinar, you'll be able to connect with your peers via LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Please use the hashtag GovLive, that's pound GOVLIVE, to connect with your peers across the Governing platform via Twitter. At the close of the webinar, we encourage you also to complete a brief survey about the presentation. I'll just reinforce we really want to hear what you think about today's webinar. If you're unable to stay with us for the entire presentation but would like to complete the survey as much as you're able, please do click the red survey widget at the bottom of the screen to launch the survey. Otherwise, that widget will pop up once the webinar concludes. At this time, we recommend that you do disable your pop-up blockers. And if you have any media player issues or any other technical problems, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help button at the bottom of the console. Joining me today on this webinar to discuss the very timely topic of migrating to the cloud is Lisa Bobo, Chief Information Officer for the City of New York. Lisa was appointed CIO in 2012 for the City of Rochester, and she's responsible for leading the city's process and technology strategy, as well as managing the overall information technology operations for the city. Her initiatives are many, and they include improving service delivery with an emphasis on enterprise planning, process improvements, on innovation, and of course, technology. Prior to becoming CIO, Lisa's experience includes work in several capacities of city government. Under her leadership, Lisa has expanded the business process service organization. Careful, there's a long list coming here because she's done a lot. Implemented a citywide governance process. She continues to drive an enterprise architecture perspective to service delivery. She's initiated an information security program, built a GIS group, and provided multiple collaborative opportunities with local high schools, colleges, corporations, and other governmental entities. I think you'll see in a moment that we are very lucky to have Lisa with us. I've already covered the introductions and housekeeping. We're going to be walking through the governing handbook that was recently published around challenges and opportunities in enterprise resource planning and migrating to the cloud. And then we'll be handing it off for the bulk of the presentation to Ms. Bobo to talk about the deep dive case study of the experience currently ongoing in the city of Rochester. And then we'll spend plenty of time, preserving plenty of time, about 30 minutes in, to begin that Q&A time together to ensure that we're answering your questions and engaging in a dialogue through the Q&A panel, as you see below at the bottom of your screen. You've heard enough about my background. I'd like to just jump into the handbook that Governing Institute released earlier this year, supported by Workday. And the handbook is truly this modern approach for moving to cloud-based enterprise resource planning. Pretty good step-by-step guide for states and local governments to move through this process in a comprehensive fashion. It is not just merely take this one of 62 steps, but as you'll see, two key pieces really popped out for me. One is this entire process of migrating to the cloud and bringing a broader system-wide approach to enterprise resource planning really is a procurement process more than a technology process. And as Lisa will describe, it requires this commitment to comprehensive change management. Five key takeaways from that handbook. And again, it is available in the resources widget on the webinar today. But the first, of course, is that we know that our legacy systems are generally unsustainable. Many of you on this webinar, or those who report to you, deal with ongoing failures of older systems, with emergency repairs, with having to deal with application patches. And we really know that this is a deferred maintenance question across the enterprise solution set for local governments. And as a result, often that primary motivation is not necessarily around savings or expense reductions, but really helping us all to serve constituents better and be much better at that enterprise of government generally. So more efficient workflow processes, expanded capabilities, et cetera. Third, and it's a real pleasure to see so many attendees from the finance perspective on this webinar, that this really is as much a budget and finance partnership as it is a technology transition. So specifically and particularly in the shift from capital expenditure to operating expense accounting under a software as service platform, as Lisa will describe, is really important to be working closely with our budget offices. And that's certainly been our experience first as a state legislator working on these transitions on the state policy level, and then working with folks on the ground all over the country, that these really are budget and finance and procurement challenges as much as they are about the technical issues themselves. Fourth, we all know, and many of you on this webinar know way better than I do, that security continues to be a prime issue to be managed. And I think we hear all the time that the software as service solution can provide greater security than having to get up to speed and managing it all in-house, as Lisa will describe as well. And finally, this is a cultural change management challenge, much more than it is just a process diagram and just technical details. This really has to be embedded across the entire enterprise of your state or local unit of government, as Lisa again will go into. Broadly, as you can think about the migration to the cloud in three phases, as the handbook lays out so nicely. Phase one is that pre-procurement planning process and the stakeholder engagement. Phase two is the formal procurement process, and of course phase three is how to successfully implement and deploy the cloud solutions. Really quickly, high-level overview. Again, I think the handbook is a good first start, and I think you'll see that Lisa's experience goes much more deeply into this process. But in the pre-procurement phase, it really is about building the business case and about making sure that there is this level set around what we're spending today and what we're willing to spend going forward, or what this might cost. And not just thinking about, again, the very hard specific numbers, and I can count to 4. I don't know why I apologize for going 1, 2, 3, 1, but step 4 is get stakeholders on board, but perhaps that's even a repeat of step 1 in its importance. In phase 2 on the procurement side, We really, obviously, vetting those vendors in a really rigorous fashion is probably as important here as in any other procurement strategy that any municipality, county, or local government or state government goes through, because it's such a complex endeavor. Second, of course, this is about technology, so making sure that the IT personnel are involved at every step of the process is critical from a capacity and accuracy solution question. Again, we've highlighted the role of the budget office throughout this process, and I would just emphasize from establishing the budget to ensuring that the procurement pathway continues to align with how the finance and budget office sees the world is going to be really important. And ensuring that security is part of that procurement process explicitly. I think the handbook is really strong about laying that out. You all know that. The successful deployment piece here and is really about committing to the enterprise-wide culture change management question. This really is going to be the key, as Lisa lays out, with any change, and that includes bringing in stakeholders all the time, and it includes the hand-holding and training of those end users to ensure that they feel like they know what they're being asked of them and have the resources to succeed. And I think the last point is really to think about, this is a broader, fully integrated, comprehensive approach. And so it does require taking that iterative strategy and being willing to defer, go live, or do it in partial components. And this becomes a much more technical component that I hope some of you will ask about if Lisa doesn't touch on it in her comments. So I think the handbook is very, very useful, but far more useful is the experience of how has this worked? And we're really grateful to be joined by Lisa Bobo, again, the CIO for the City of Rochester, New York. And Lisa, without further ado, please take it away.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks to Jeremy for the introduction. I hope I can live up to that, and to Governing Magazine for hosting this webinar. It's really important for me to set the stage before we start and provide some background information on why I feel it's important to participate in this webinar. We are currently not live on a new human resource management payroll solution. So I know right with that statement, I'm going to get a lot of people to sit back and say, why in the world would you do a webinar if you haven't gone live and you've been successful? We are right in the middle of it, and we are in the thick of it. We have a tentative target date to go live in spring of 2017. So, again, you may ask, why would I agree to discuss our selection and implementation process when we're not live? When I became a CIO 4 years ago, one of my main initiatives was collaboration and sharing of information. Many of us are doing the same things. We're just in different locations. We are asking the same questions, and we're trying to implement the same type of solutions that support government services. So, in the spirit of collaboration, if I can provide one small piece of information today that puts you on a better track to implementing a cloud solution, then I feel like we are successful. Again, I don't feel like I have all the answers. However, hopefully that you find some piece of information in today's presentation that may help you. So to start off with, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the City of Rochester, and I'm sure some individuals on the phone can relate. We have 3,600 employees, and that's including part-time and seasonal employees. We have 6 unions. We're fortunate, I believe, to have a centralized IT department. And our financial system is Tyler Technologies. And that's important because as we talk about change management and how we've learned from other implementations, that was an important step in our whole migration to whether it be cloud solutions or just enterprise solutions in general. We implemented 5 years ago, which was a major, major change initiative. Today, we are currently on a mainframe system for payroll personnel that was purchased in the 1980s. It has been customized. We actually received the code after we purchased it from the company several years later and have been able to actually customize the city with our own application developers and have kept that running up until today. We have multiple levels of customizations, mostly due to union changes and requirements, compliance changes. The mainframe system is an obvious risk from an IT perspective, as Jeremy alluded to earlier, and from just an overall technology platform perspective. We are still using paper time cards. And as you can imagine, this is a big driver from our administration. Anybody new in the administration comes into the city of Rochester, the very first thing they say is get rid of these paper time cards. Even though, as we all know, the paper time cards are one component of it, but that is definitely the area that gets a lot of attention. We have over 25 disparate systems that we're hoping to replace with this implementation. So, as we look out to say, how are we going to select a vendor and what are we going to do? The City of Rochester is extremely focused on process. We are very process-driven, and we have process analysts located within our IT department. I'll be the first person to say, as the CIO, who everybody believes the CIO is very technology-driven, I'll be the first one to say that process is extremely important, and in most cases even more important than the technology. The technology is the easy part. We did documentation of our current state processes, and this took over a year, over 2 years, to actually complete. And some of that was a lot of starts and stops on our part. I want to say that it may not have been always the top priority to focus on. Other priorities came in and out. And until we could actually focus on it and drive that, we actually were able to go through and complete that. This process involved over 70 city employees. And I want to stress that again, it involved over 70 city employees. Non-IT employees. The only IT employees involved in the process were the process analysts themselves facilitating the sessions. And that's important as we walk through and look at how we get buy-in from stakeholders outside of IT. It starts really from day one when we start looking at their processes. All process work was documented with process analysts, as I mentioned, from IT. We had over 80 business processes that were impacted across all human resource management areas. So we started to, and we have, it hasn't only been with our payroll personnel implementation, but other implementations as well, is to start looking at it from a process perspective rather than a department perspective. I know I've spoke to a lot of people where they've said, you know, you need to really understand what finance and payroll are doing. Yes, those are departments in HR, and you need to understand what they're doing, but you need to understand also the processes outside of those areas. This was important also because we started to talk about standardization across processes with the departments involved and started to get their buy-in to what we were doing. Next, we looked at a total cost of ownership. We took our current state processes and developed the total cost of ownership. We performed some additional discovery that went beyond what our process discovery work was, and then we did look at technology. What are our current costs around running our mainframe, our payroll system on our mainframe? What are our total costs for paper that is being used? We realized really quickly, to be honest with you, going from a mainframe environment to a state-of-the-art system, that technology was not, the cost for technology was not going to be our driver. It was more from a risk component. However, the total cost of ownership was an extremely important deliverable for our senior management team. And at that point, we were able to start presenting the potential cost savings in looking for a new solution. just going back also to the total cost of ownership, I think our largest cost savings that we saw were in time and attendance, and just the multiple hands, obviously, that process our time cards. GOFA played an important role in our process as well. As we presented the total cost of ownership to our senior management team, there was still some question about, did we look at the right things? Are we seeing the right numbers? How do we benchmark against other municipalities? This is great that we see this and we see our current state and we see what our current costs are, but how do we know if we're different than any other municipalities? Our finance group has a very strong relationship with GOFA, with the Government Finance Officers Association, and we reached out to them to ask them to do an assessment for us. And what they were able to do is take our total cost of ownership assessment and then evaluate that, benchmark that against other municipalities, and then come back with feedback as to how we did with our total cost of ownership. And actually, we got very high marks. They were very impressed with what we had already completed. And then also gave us additional information that we could pass back to the sponsors. One of those pieces of information that they provided to us was that a lot of government entities were starting to look at hosted solutions. So that already at that point in time, we have not even gone out for an RFP. We have just looked at our own processes and our own costs, and it already started the discussion of, do we want to outsource payroll? Do we want to look at hosted solutions? And now we have somebody coming from the table outside of the city of Rochester telling us this seems to be the trend and this is where other governments are moving. We also started to engage unions. Our HR group did a great job at starting to meeting with our unions and educating them on our path forward. As I mentioned earlier, we have 6 unions in the city, and this was a recommendation also by GOFA and a comment that they had made to us that they had saw a lot of concerns and issues from other municipalities that had waited until the vendor actually was selected and then reached out to the unions. And then, as you can imagine, there's a lot of delays with union questions and going back and forth, where a lot of the questions from the union and a lot of the decisions you're making at that time are not dependent on a vendor. They can be made much further in advance than the vendor coming in, so you don't delay and there aren't additional costs involved. We started the RFP process, and we used all of our current state analysis work to bring into our RFP for process and system requirements. And again, I'm going to stress they're not just system requirements, they're also process requirements. They were developed in the current state, and we asked vendors to come in for a 5-day scripted demo session to actually demonstrate how they would address those process requirements. We had 4 vendors come in, and again, so that was 5 days apiece, and that was, I believe it took over a month and a half because we had some spaces in between the vendors. During that time, through the RFP process, we had over 50 individuals from our departments come in and evaluate those vendors. Also, another very important comment to make is that before we went into that RFP process, we met with the sponsors and received a buy-in that when the RFP was issued, we were going to look at outsourced payroll vendors, we were going to look at hosted vendors, and we were going to look at insourced. So the decision was made at that time. I truly believe that if that decision is not made until after your RFP responses come in, it's almost too late. If you know up front that you're not going for a hosted vendor, don't waste your time or don't waste the vendor's time. Just a little bit more information about our scripted demos. As I mentioned, the vendors came in for 5 days, followed a very regimented scripted process, demonstrating how they do everything in the test environment. I always laugh when I meet somebody and they say that we evaluated a vendor. A vendor came in and did a presentation for 2 hours, and I think, oh, that's one lucky vendor, because I think our vendors would say that this was a very painful process in a lot of ways for them, but it really allowed us to see their product and engage our city employees. We talk a lot about change management, so this is where change management, it really gets to the heart of the project. We involved the individuals from the departments early on in the current state process, and now they're coming back and they feel that they're part of it because they're actually able to see the process requirements that they helped to develop and evaluate the vendor's solution based on those requirements that they had actually documented. Again, over 55 city employees evaluated the solution. Out of that 55, only 5 were from IT. 5. So that a big difference between numbers. And the individuals from IT were obviously evaluating the solution for the actual platform, for the technology components, and also looking at the security elements. Again, very painful process for the vendors. Budget and finance were included in this evaluation. They were very much a part of it. They were seeing what the solutions had to offer. As the CIO, I only attended the kickoff session, and I attended a half-a-day technology discussion. Our selection. Before I get into Workday, I want to mention again, because this is really important, budget was part of the evaluation for the process requirements. And then the CIO and the legal team negotiated the contract, but HR and finance and budget were also updated during all steps of the negotiation. So they were very close to the process. They were very involved. We also looked at a 5 to 7 year cost projection at that time prior to actually selecting a vendor. We really wanted to look out to say, what do our costs look like over a 5 to 7 year time frame? Budget and finance were at the table when we did that. If you're only looking at a year, you're obviously not looking out far enough, especially with hosted solutions. We selected Workday for human resource management and payroll. It is a hosted solution, but it's so important for me to stress, and I'm going to continue to stress this, and this is in the handbook as well. Selection was not made based on a cloud versus an in-house solution. Selection was made on business requirements. We did decide early on that we were going to look at hosted solutions in-house and outsourcing for payroll complete processing. However, business requirements came first, and then the platform came second. Workday ranked ahead of all the other vendors in overall requirements, their ease of use, and data analytics and back-end data structure. We selected Kronos for time and attendance and advanced scheduling. And again, with Kronos, it was requirements first, platform second. So they met all of our requirements. Workday's time and attendance features were good, but we had some unique and complex requirements for public safety, timekeeping, and scheduling methods that we felt our business owners felt and evaluated and ranked Kronos as a preferred selection. We made a decision to implement this in-house, and this was an IT budget decision to reduce operating costs in this area. Requirements first, platform second. Kronos does offer a hosted solution. However, we felt in order to balance our capital budget and operating that it made sense for Kronos to look at Kronos as an in-house solution. We are also implementing telestaff as well for scheduling in the Kronos area. So making the cloud business case. as you can hopefully can see, that it doesn't start at the time that the vendor selected. It starts really from day one. Requirements first. Ensure budget and finances buy-in to evaluate hosted solutions before you issue an RFP. If operating budget cannot be allocated, don't waste your time on evaluating hosted solutions. Vendors were ranked by all city department business leads, and we had participation from budget and finance from day one. GFOA and Gartner, also I didn't mention Gartner earlier in the conversation, but we had also reached out to them and had multiple discussions with Gartner analysts. And as I mentioned, finance had a previous relationship with GFOA. They had trust with GFOA, and it wasn't just IT making the case for a hosted solution. We also did the 5 to 7 year cost analysis, which was important in this whole process. This is my favorite picture, and it's hanging outside my door of my office, and it's used for most of my presentations. I think probably everybody in the city of Rochester has seen this multiple times, and any vendor who comes into my office to try to sell me technology sees this immediately. It seems so foundational, but sometimes this may be difficult for technology vendors to understand. It's more than technology, and we all know that. But we want to go towards technology because it's easy and it's fast, and we can usually take it and throw it in and replace the technology, keep our processes the same. So we really have not seen any efficiencies in the end, but we can say we threw new technology at it. If your focus is only on the cloud solutions, then you are not necessarily taking into consideration the other 3 layers. You need to look at the enterprise organization. You need to look at how your organization is currently laid out. What is your departmental structure? Who does what? You need to look at the processes that are involved in end-to-end and looking at all departments that are involved and your employees and the people. We are implementing new processes and some that don't touch technology. So sometimes that's difficult for some of our end users or our customers to understand because they look at us as technologists, but it's really about the process and the technology. And this is driving major change management initiatives. I can't stress that enough as well, is these, much bigger than the technology, is the change management initiatives that we're trying to drive. In our case, for the city of Rochester, we're trying to replace software that was implemented in the 1980s. And some people that are still here today that helped implement that and take a lot of pride in that. Developing standardized methodologies to drive total cost of ownership and process requirements helps your organization to get on board for all other projects. It's not just your ERP. If you follow this methodology, it's not just your ERP project, and it's you're coming in with these requirements and asking them to look at process. It's every project, enterprise project that you look at as a whole, and you start to develop standardizations and people start to feel comfortable with the process. Do as much work as you can in the first 3 layers before engaging a vendor. Then this may help build the case for cloud versus in-house. Don't wait to do the work in the first 3 layers until a vendor comes in. It's too late. Opportunities. Some may call these challenges. I prefer to call them opportunities and take the optimistic approach. Change management is huge for these projects. I keep saying that, especially in government. We have a change management team that is made up of liaisons from all of our city departments that meet regularly and go through all of the changes that are occurring, and they are the primary communicators also back to their departments. We're also currently offering training to employees for basic computer skills because we have potential employees that have not used a computer, at least here at the City of Rochester. They may have at home, but we need to address basic computer skills. And you can never communicate enough We find that with all of the layers, all the way up from city council all the way down, it's just constant communication. Managing the scope. We are managing 2 large projects at the same time, Workday and Kronos. Their timelines and schedules are not perfectly aligned and can pull on the same resources and employees within the city. Having enough internal resources is always a challenge for all of us. And if we could do it over, we may have implemented 2 separate projects and not have done them at the same time. So I caution you, if you are heading down this path, to potentially look at that. Implementing Workday in government. Workday is fairly new in the government space, and we have agreed to help them build a government model. It's fun, it's exciting to be able to do that, but of course, I'm going to be honest with you, there's challenges in that space as well. For the most part, Workday has been great about addressing them, but it can be slightly challenging for our staff. Internal decision-making, making process changes and standardizing brings resistance, and we are working with that on a daily basis. Decisions need to be made quickly, and we are not always in an environment where decisions can be immediately turned around, which is also working with 2 vendors and wanting decisions right away that can present a problem. And again, don't wait for the vendor to be on board to make decisions that have been made, that can be made before the vendor engagement. Sponsor buy-in. Sponsor buy-in is critical, and due to the duration of these projects in government setting, be prepared if your sponsors change. We have had that. We've had that with other projects, and that is always difficult. You spend so much time and energy getting sponsors on board and bought in and helping you drive, and when they change, it can be very upsetting. So you need to be prepared for that, of when and if that happens. And as we know, payroll personnel is not a public-facing application, and it may not always be where a new administration wants to focus. So be prepared to address that. In closing, when we're talking about making a business case for cloud strategy, we often think IT needs to make the case. The best solution is to educate and communicate to your customers so platform is not just determined by IT. Going back to my introduction, it's all about collaboration and getting everybody on board from day one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that really thorough case study, Lisa. Really appreciate so many particular points that you brought up that have resonated for me in my experience, and I think with folks across the webinar. We have from many states around the country, cities, counties, and state officials, and it looks like even some private practitioners as well that really appreciate your perspective, so thank you. Particular focus, just a reminder for those of you who want to engage in the Q&A, on the bottom of your screen there is the Q&A tab, and please do keep those questions coming in. One particular thing that an employee from a Massachusetts town has asked, particularly Lisa, around your vetting of vendors, is a little bit more specifics around that scripted demo that you described. Can you define it a little further, talk about how you developed the demo, who developed it, et cetera?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Jeremy. As I mentioned, it was 5 days for each vendor, and we took all of our documented current state processes on everything we're doing in the, we're looking at the HR processes and the payroll. So end-to-end process, and we had documented all of those. Those were actually in our RFP for the vendors to respond to. So when the vendors respond to the RFP, they can say, yes, we do this, or no, we don't. But then we take it to the next step when they come in to do the scripted demos. It's mostly those same requirements that they saw in the RFP, maybe formatted slightly different, but having them actually demonstrate in a test environment how that could actually be achieved. And obviously it's going to look different than what we're used to, and there's going to be some discussion points going back and forth. But for each one of those process requirements, we have business owners from the other departments come in and actually evaluate them on whether they felt comfortable that that vendor could actually meet the requirements of that process requirement. It's all facilitated by our process analysts within IT. They do an amazing, incredible job. When we talk about having I think we had over 55 people attend our scripted demo process, and we have people from the department coming in and out. Usually one portion will be an hour. So they come in from the department, they go through the scripted demo process, do the evaluation, and then leave, and then another group that are part of a whole completely different process will come in and do an evaluation. Our process analysts take all the information at the end of that and compile all of that data to eventually present to the sponsors.
That's really helpful. I'm particularly impressed that you engaged 55 stakeholders fairly formally in the vetting process on the vendor side, and I imagine that they were also involved. I can only imagine the headaches and the challenge and of getting there, but also the real commitment that your office showed to each part of the enterprise. I think that probably helped you really build buy-in, not only in the vendor selection, but also in that overall change management process. Did you use an outside sourcing resource to develop the criteria of the RFP, or was that done in-house by those analysts?
It was all done in-house. It was done in-house. Approximately 6 years ago, we started a process services group within IT and have process analysts that actually work on these projects and also help in the configuration and have kind of a dual role in that they do a lot of the process work, but also are very capable of doing the configuration of the solution, and some may go on to actually support the system after it is implemented. A little bit different skill than a potential developer.
Very interesting. One of the shifting gears here a little bit, a question that I actually had from my work as a legislator in city from Florida asked specifically about the role of internal auditors through that entire change management process that you initiated, and at what point did you engage with them, or is it sort of been let them wait and have them tell us where some issues might arise?
They did. I believe they attended some of the process sessions in different requirements area. We also engaged our external auditors in some areas and had some questions for them as well. So probably, to be honest with you, not as much involvement as I would have liked to see, to be able to say, be careful of this or watch out for that, but definitely were involved.
Excellent. And on that same path of stakeholders, you had mentioned the 6 unions that are active in the city and or represent municipal employees. I think this is probably more of a personal comment than it is a specific question. One of the things that I saw as a state legislator who aligned with my friends in labor because of my politics, as in advancing policy innovation and enterprise improvements, I just can't stress enough how important that work that you did very early on is to engage the union representation so that they feel comfortable across the board and feel like all of those issues, all of their issues may get resolved as you go through. And again, 55 stakeholders involved in the vetting of those vendors. I can only imagine for Workday and the others that it really was quite an experience. But to have those unions supporting through that process and with that buy-in, congratulations, Lisa. I'm really impressed by that work.
Let me add to that when I had mentioned engaging the unions early, the types of things that we engaged the unions with were we were looking at right now today we have a biweekly payroll and a weekly payroll depending on what groups you fall into. So that was one thing that we knew we could approach the unions on before the vendors were in-house. Whether we were going to require full direct deposit was another one. So we had a list of, I want to say, 6 to 8 items that we said, no matter who the vendor is, let's approach the unions and start having these discussions today. There were other areas where the union had said we really want to be able to see what the future state is before we can make a decision. So it was a balance. However, anything you can get in early is important. And if nothing else, just to inform them that you're going down this path. So when they're hearing it from the employees, you're in alignment with them.
Absolutely. I can't reinforce that enough from, as I said, from my experience, much more on the balance of politics and policy innovation. I think what you just said is really, really critical. Shifting gears a little bit, talking about security. Can you walk through a little bit more about how you evaluated, particularly your selected vendor of Workday and their security approach, and maybe a broader comments on your perspective around security?
Sure. I think security is a concern for all of us all the time. I know it's the one thing I always say that keeps me up at night. So when we talk about hosted solutions, that's the flag that gets immediately put up is, well, what about security? And, how do you feel comfortable about the security side of it? We're fortunate that we had brought in a security manager to oversee our security space right along the same time that all of this was happening. So he was very much involved with the project. And I want to say more so the discussions around security started when we were down to the negotiation stage and we really had 2 finalists, 2 vendors, and then really started to take a deep dive into security and how protected the vendor was, especially Workday. Workday was great in sharing their SOC reports with us and being able to evaluate those. My security manager reviewed those. Talking to other people helped, and references in government and in private industry. We have quite a few companies here in the city of Rochester that use Workday, so to be able to reach out to them, I'm connected to the CIOs in those organizations was very helpful. And we felt in the end that we felt very comfortable about the security. And I say that I don't think anybody ever feels 100% comfortable with security, but as comfortable as we could feel. And they have a lot of organizations, large organizations, that they run payroll for. The interesting thing, let me just make one more comment on that, is I was with a group of CIOs early on before we were looking at payroll personnel, and I made a comment that we're dipping our toe in the water with hosted solutions. And they had asked me, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, we're doing more smaller implementations with hosted solutions. So we have today, I believe, over 5, I think, hosted environments for different things. And we're ensuring, those are working okay before we go big. And as I was making that statement to the other CIOs, I questioned myself and said, that doesn't even sound right, because if I'm dipping my toe in the water with smaller vendors where we may have a bigger security concern, maybe that isn't the right direction. And did not then just the next day say we're going to go out and go big and go Workday, but it just happened that through the requirements gathering, Workday was selected, so we went to the other extreme.
Interesting, really interesting. I think one of the things that I've really been impressed by your work and thinking through many actually of the attendees that I know and the type of work and challenges that they encounter at the municipal, county, and state level is dovetailing. This is a great question coming from Susan, who works at a county, about the new system and the need to align existing processes to that new system. And can you describe a little bit, Susan's question is specifically whether the city is changing processes to fit this new system, or whether the system has that flexibility to support your existing processes, and how are you approaching that, making sure those gears don't grind as you're implementing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know that our process analysts would love to answer that today. As you can imagine, for a process analyst, it's a challenge, because we're always, in working with the vendor, always trying to look to use best practices. And we're constantly saying here that if we're the only one doing it, if we're the only one that has this process, and the vendor cannot incorporate that in their system, then do we need to step back and question ourselves on why we're doing it? And sometimes that's enough to say, yes, we're right, and we need to do it a different way. Sometimes there's a legitimate reason of, for some reason that we absolutely cannot change this process, and we need to figure out how to do it in the new system. At this point, I think that we've been fairly fortunate in that we've found configuration rules, and that's what we liked about Workday, is it was so configurable that we felt when we had those situations where we just could not change our current process and go with a best-in-class, that Workday was configurable enough to do that. But that is definitely, you've hit, I think, the nail on the head with the complexity of, everything, every single thing you're going through, you're asking that question. Why are we doing it? Do we have to continue to do it? Is there a better way to do it? And you win some of those battles, and you lose some.
Absolutely. A follow-up question that I have to that actually has been through this process, the joke of life, liberty, and property is never safe while the legislature is in session, and certainly know the reputation of Albany, and having been an activist state legislator myself, things can change, the ground can shift under your feet as you've gone through this process. Has there been any specific sort of outside regulatory change or other best practice broadly that has impacted your process? And after this, we can go to one more question and then wrap up. But I'd really be curious about how much things have changed as you've gone through.
Yeah, not up to this point. However, just as big of a concern as the legislative part of it is the union changes. And we were in an environment prior to this, and currently today, still being in our legacy environment, when union contracts are negotiated, usually IT is the last to know the results of that. And that's where we've really ended up with our legacy system, is having such a great degree of customizations. And we've had a lot of discussions about how do we get into the front end. And obviously we're not going to be the target of how a contract gets negotiated. But if there's a cost associated with that, ensure that everybody's aware of what that actually means.
Great. Well, you've been so generous with your time, Lisa, and your knowledge, and I think it's very clear to everybody through the volume of questions that we've gotten that there's a lot of affinity to the position that you're in, and the ability to learn from the great example of the city of Rochester. I also know that, Lisa, you've learned from a lot of people who have come before you, and to that question, to that point, a broader question many people are asking, not only about this presentation and the handbook, which of course can be procured through the resources widget on this webinar, but also for a copy of the RFP and any other scripts, and whether they can follow up with you individually at the city after. Is that something that you can share? And I guess a personal question would also be, I would imagine that because this is really about change management and localized culture, that RFP can be useful, but really would need to be tweaked for each. For instance, your county partners probably could not even take that RFP and do a boilerplate themselves, but it would have to be adjusted for their own enterprise culture.
Agree. I think the RFP would have to be adjusted. I think sometimes it's helpful just to see formatting and take a look to ensure that nothing was missed as a second look. But I would be happy to, if somebody was to reach out to me, to share some of our information at a high level. That's not a problem.
Great. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do that and to continue to be a great resource. We're really getting close to the top of the hour again, and really want to be respectful of everybody on the webinar. First, on behalf of the many dozens of attendees, great thanks to you, Lisa, again, for sharing your expertise and really being forthright with a lot of the issues you've faced. Also want to thank our partners at Workday for enabling us to bring this worthwhile discussion to this broad audience of state, city, county, and private partners, helping to solve this real critical challenge that you've laid out for us, with migrating to the cloud with great thought and hopefully successful implementation. So thank you again to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at another governing event.
Thank you, Jeremy.